what you'll see are three major trends happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And quite honestly, the nations that are most willing to embrace these three trends will emerge from the classic empire the most vibrant. Okay, and these three major trends are: number one, deindustrialization and deurbanization. Okay, so what I mean by that is that it is silly that we have so many mega cities around the world. Think about how many cities with 10 million plus people there are around the world. And it's silly and stupid because we depend on food to live. And these people in the cities, they're not growing food. And where they're getting food is importing this food from overseas or internally. Okay, so you have basically a specialization of agriculture throughout the world, where basically just one nation just does one cash crop, growing bananas or avocados, whatever. Okay, but that's just really silly to do. But you can do this as long as you have cheap oil, because cheap oil allows you the fertilizers to grow food, but also cheap oil allows you to transport this food throughout the world. But again, it's all premised on cheap oil. What happens when the cheap oil goes away? Well, you have food supply issues, okay? So these 10 million people in the cities doing whatever, whether it's cryptocurrency scams or gambling on poly market, or engaging in derivatives, creating derivatives, creating AI, like it's all just useless and silly. People need to grow food, and so that we can eat. Okay, so if you are really into AI, guess what? You're going to be really, really screwed without access to cheap energy. So stop this AI stupidity and go back to growing food. Okay, so that means getting people out of the cities and back to the farmland to grow food, to create more sustainable supply chains. And again, you have to do this or your people are going to starve. I'm telling this entire world, okay? Give up your delusions about AI. It does nothing. It'll get you nowhere. Make sure your people have access to food and water, okay? That's the first major trend. Deindustrialization and urbanization require cheap energy. And once you lose access to cheap energy, you have to worry about having sustainable food supply networks. And that means you have to move people back to the countryside to grow food in order to feed your population. Okay, that has to be done. Okay, that's my first point. My second trend, the second trend that's very important, is the idea of remilitarization, meaning that in the future, people are going to fight over resources. And so you need to remilitarize your population. And what this means ultimately is the return of nationalism. And in some cases, actually the return of fascism. Because how you galvanize your population, how you convince them to sacrifice their lives for the greater good is through nationalism. There are some other nations that will become theocracies, the embrace of religious faith, okay? But like the idea of this, like this multicultural, global diversity, DEI, all this nonsense, it has to go away. Just throw it out, okay? No more diversity, no more multiculturalism. Just focus on who we are as a people and the need for us to be cohesive in order to defend our nation, okay? So remilitarization, the return of nationalism. And the third major trend is the breaking up of the global economy and the creation of mercantile trade networks, okay? And that could be cooperation among certain nations, and that's what we should see in Europe, where Europe becomes its own trading bloc and no longer engages with the rest of the world. But it could also mean that a certain nation becomes dominant in a region and imposes its will in that region. So I see Israel achieving something called the Greater Israel Project and being able to control trade throughout the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and Africa. In East Asia, there'll be competition between South Korea, North Korea, Vietnam, Japan, and China for resources. And they need to create their own independent supply chains, especially Japan. Japan is in this sort of scenario the most disadvantaged because they don't have enough resources to fuel their advanced manufacturing economy. And so we could see a very aggressive remilitarized Japan over the next few months. In fact, Prime Minister Takaichi has voiced tremendous support for this Israel-U.S. war against Iran, and she's promised to send missiles and munitions in defense, over to the Middle East to support this war. Okay, so these are the three major trends that we should see over the next few months. Nations adopting more deindustrialized policies, nations embracing nationalism, and then also nations trying to create their own independent supply chains. And the irony, of course, is the nations that benefit the most from globalization will be the ones that actually have the toughest time adapting to the new world. And that includes, of course, United States, China, Germany. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Professor Jiang, about you made a comment about Greater Israel and the attempt to achieve it. Where do you see that now, given that Iran doesn't seem like it's on the verge of collapse? It seems like its government is very much intact, and now even the collective West is admitting this. And I think Europe is on the phone with Iran right now, trying to get a deal to move their cargo and their commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. But also, Israel is in heavy fighting with Hezbollah, and part of the Greater Israel Project will also include Iraq, and we see the resistance downing refueling tankers. So there's certainly opposition to this, and we haven't even gone into Yemen yet with what could happen if the Bab el-Mandeb is closed. So where do you make of where the Greater Israel Project is right now and how that will take shape in the days and weeks to come?
Okay, so Israel is a very difficult nation to understand because of their theology, because of their understanding of their place in the world. They call themselves God's chosen people. Okay, so from an Israeli perspective, okay, if you are a religious extremist, this war is going according to God's plan. Because how do you achieve the Greater Israel Project? Well, you achieve the Greater Israel Project by removing America from the Middle East. And you achieve the Greater Israel Project by basically destroying the GCC. And ultimately, to achieve the Greater Israel Project, you'll eventually have to go after Turkey and Egypt as well. Because around the Greater Israel, if you see a map, it actually extends from the Nile to the Euphrates. Iran is actually not part of Greater Israel. Okay, so in other words, these religious extremists want this war in the Middle East in order to move forward, to accelerate the Greater Israel Project, which they believe is what God promised them through their ancestor Abraham. Okay, so in other words, from an Israeli perspective, your real objectives in this war is not to defeat Iran. Okay, you want to weaken Iran, but it's not really feasible for you as a small nation to defeat Iran. Okay, so what are your real military objectives that you can actually say? Well, first of all, it's to destroy the American empire and force Americans out of the Middle East. It's to destroy Saudi Arabia, because actually part of Saudi Arabia is a part of the Greater Israel Project, and to drag Turkey into this war, because the south of Anatolia, Turkey, is actually part of the Greater Israel Project as well. So that's what you want to do. And if this war drags on, and the American sends in ground troops, then you're actually accelerating God's plan. Also, what people don't recognize is that this destruction in Israel, these religious extremists think that it is the will of God. Okay, so where are the Iranians striking? Tel Aviv. Where are they not striking, really? Jerusalem. There's a huge difference between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. People don't really appreciate.
Oh, sorry. That was a mistake.
People don't really appreciate the political dynamic in Tel Aviv. Jerusalem and people don't really appreciate the political dynamic in Israel. Tel Aviv and Jerusalem are two opposing centers of gravity in Israel. Tel Aviv is the Western looking, the open, the cosmopolitan, the secular, democratic version or face of Israel. Jerusalem is the inward looking, the religious, theocratic, a conservative face of Israel. And guess what? They hate each other. And if Tel Aviv were to be destroyed, okay, meaning like the open, cosmopolitan, democratic secular Israel would be destroyed in this war, good, because that is God's will. God doesn't want these, open Western Jews in Israel. He wants them to repent. He wants them to engage in redemption. And in the Jewish theology, redemption is only possible through pain, suffering. Okay, you need to commit sin in order to force God to punish you, and then you engage in a long process of self-reflection, self-revitalization in order to fully embrace God. Okay, so in other words, these religious extremists are hoping to use this war to inflict so much damage and pain on secular Israel that they see the error of their ways and they embrace God fully. And if you don't do so, well, then go away, go back to Europe, go back to America. Who cares? Okay, but Israel, they want Israel to become a theocracy because of this war. So I know it's hard to understand because most of us are not religious, and when we hear this, we think it's all insane. But unfortunately, right now, the religious fanatics have control over the national security apparatus, the military of Israel, and they want to use this war in order to bring the Jewish people closer to God. And they believe that by doing so, this will accelerate the coming of the Messiah and usher in the Messianic age. So from their perspective, it's all going according to plan. And they have some surprises in store for the world. For example, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which I think may be destroyed in this war.
Well, also, Professor Jiang, the U.S. military has been infected by this kind of religious extremism. You've probably seen the reports of 200 plus complaints from the Military Religious Freedom Foundation by U.S. troops saying that they were told that this war was all part of God's divine plan. And they were told there were multiple references to the book of Revelation referring to Armageddon and the imminent return of Jesus Christ because of this war. So, I think a lot of people are interested, Professor John, in hearing your take on how this religious extremism we see, and this is when we talk Israel and of course the collective West, it's getting worse and worse, contrary to how people view Iran, actually. And I'm wondering how you see that affecting not just this war, but also the world as these changes, the end of unipolar dominance by the United States really becomes much more apparent from this war, and of course, in the coming days and weeks.
Right. So I've always argued that this war is eschatological. Okay, meaning you can't really explain this war from a purely geopolitical lens. Yes, I do know that I spent the early part of this discussion talking about why empire needs to engage in war. But there are alternatives to what they're doing. Okay, so the first alternative is just become friends with Iran. Remove the sanctions, return to the nuclear deal, the Obama era nuclear deal, and engage in trade with Iran. And look, the Iranians are pragmatic people. They would welcome American investment. They would welcome the opportunity to sell their oil to America. Okay, that's your first option. But if you don't want to do that option, then you can also choose a strategy of economic strangulation, meaning that you basically embargo Iran. Iran sells most of its oil to China, and that's a shadow fleet. Well, you can embargo Iran because if you just look at the map, there are American military bases everywhere, right? So you have options. The worst thing you can do is actually go and attack Iran, because then you find yourself in this sort of situation where now you're losing the war and you're forced to send in ground troops if you are to win this war. And we've already discussed why that would be suicidal, both militarily, economically, and politically. So then the question then is, why did they pick the worst option? And it's eschatological, where there are people in the United States, and these are secret societies, and these are different secret societies who believe this. But they believe that a war in the Middle East, once it started, it will create a chain of events that will lead eventually to the end of the world, the end times. And for different secret societies, this could mean different things. Okay, so for the Freemasons, it would mean the creation of Pax Judaica, a one world government, and the coming of an AI surveillance state, where Jerusalem is the center of the world. Okay, then you have these Messianic Jews, called the Shabbat Lubavitch movement, and there are others as well. Okay, but they're the most famous, who believe that this war will initiate something called the War of Gog and Magog, which is really the final battle of humanity, where the world basically attacks Israel, and this will force the coming of their Messiah, the intervention of God, basically, and the coming of the Messianic age, where God will live with His people, the Jews, and then the Christian Zionists, who believe that this war will initiate the War of Gog and Magog, and then Jesus will return to save Israel from its enemies. And then all Christians who believe in Jesus will be raptured up into heaven before Jesus ushers in the millennium, the Messianic age, and then you have the final day of judgment. Okay, so I understand this is sort of like bonkers, but I mean, most people in this world happen to be religious. Christian Zionism is about a quarter of the population of America. You have this movement called Christians United for Israel, 7 million members, and their only 7 million members, their only goal is to ensure that American politicians help bring about the end of days. And these are the people who actually are funding these West Bank settlements, which are clearly against international law, right? So you have all these Israeli settlers in the West Bank who don't actually work, and they have like large families. It's all being funded by Christians United for Israel and other Christian Zionists. So this plan has been in motion for decades. I would argue even for centuries. Okay, so they want to usher in the end of days, and so there are certain things that will happen that will surprise people, and it makes absolutely no sense. But it's all according to their theology, their eschatology. Okay, so what will happen eventually is the Al-Aqsa Mosque will be destroyed. And in fact, there's been discussions on social media how this will happen. Basically, the idea is, okay, for the past few years, they've been conducting archaeological digs under the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the third holiest site in Islam, by the way. And so the foundations of the Al-Aqsa Mosque are very unstable. And so basically, if an Iranian missile goes astray, and we won't actually know if it's an Iranian missile, but of course we blame on the Iranians, then there'll be a controlled demolition of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Okay, so again, look, it's all speculation, it's all rumors, but if it were to happen, then you will know that it's all for eschatological purposes. And of course, and also like this is hard for people to understand, but anti-Semitism, the rise of anti-Semitism in the Western world is also part of this eschatology, because in both the Jewish and Christian eschatological understanding of things, the Jews must return to Jerusalem to seek redemption, to seek to seek the love of God, to unify with God, and that basically means bringing the Jewish diaspora back to Jerusalem. Now, as you know, many Jews in the Western world live very nice lives. They're very successful.
Oh, you froze, Professor Jiang. You said they're very successful. If you come back.
Yeah,
there you go.
So they're successful, and then they won't come back voluntarily. Well, then you make them. And again, I know this sounds crazy, but please remember, this war in Iran is crazy. It makes absolutely no sense why the Americans are fighting the war the way they are. And it like honestly, it doesn't seem as though Trump and his people really care. And their response to this growing unpopularity of this war in America is maybe to institute a national draft. There's talk of deploying the National Guard to quell unrest throughout throughout America. like Trump's cabinet has basically moved on to American military bases. And the people that would be most responsible for a national draft and the sending of the National Guard, people like Pete Hegseth and Stephen Miller and Christy Noem, they've all moved to American military bases. And why would they do that? Okay, so it seems as though something is being prepared for America.
Yo, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're diving into something that's been on my mind ever since I watched that last Prof Jiang video. The video I'm about to react to is titled Prof Jiang Predictions and Why They Always Seem to Happen or Come to Pass, and this is exactly what I've been curious about. Because here's the thing, we've all seen futurists and predictors and so-called experts who make bold predictions that never materialize, right? Remember when we were supposed to have flying cars by 2000? Remember when everyone said the internet was just a fad? Remember all the doom and gloom predictions about Y2K that never happened? But Prof Jiang is different. His predictions actually seem to come true with an unsettling frequency. And that's what makes this video so important. We're not just looking at what he predicts, but why his predictions tend to be accurate. What's his methodology? What does he see that others miss? How does he consistently read the trends correctly? This is going to be fascinating because understanding how to predict the future accurately is maybe even more valuable than knowing any specific prediction. If we can understand his methodology, we can start applying it to our own lives, our own decisions, our own futures. All right, I've got my notebook ready because I have a feeling this is going to be educational in a whole different way than the last video. I'm ready to learn not just about the future, but about how to think about the future. Let's get into it. Okay, the video starts with a montage of Prof Jiang's past predictions alongside news headlines showing those predictions coming true. And wow, this is immediately striking. I'm seeing predictions from 2015 about remote work becoming dominant, and there's a 2020 headline about the pandemic accelerating remote work. I'm seeing predictions from 2018 about AI disrupting white-collar jobs, and there's a 2024 headline about companies laying off workers and replacing them with AI. The video is building the case right from the start that this isn't coincidence, this isn't luck. Prof Jiang has a track record. Now we're getting into the main content. There's a narrator explaining that Prof Jiang has made over 100 specific predictions over the last 15 years, and approximately 73% of them have either fully materialized or are clearly in the process of materializing. That's a remarkable hit rate when you consider that most futurists are lucky if they get 30 to 40% right. So the video is going to break down why Prof Jiang is so accurate. What's his secret? What does he know that others don't? Reason number 1, he follows the money. The narrator is explaining that one of Prof Jiang's core principles is follow the money. He doesn't just look at what people say they're going to do or what they hope will happen. He looks at where money is actually flowing. They're showing an example from 2016 when Prof Jiang predicted that electric vehicles would become mainstream within 10 years. At the time, a lot of people were skeptical. EVs were still niche, expensive, and had limited range. But Prof Jiang looked at where venture capital was flowing, where major automakers were investing their R&D budgets, where government subsidies were being directed. And all the money was flowing toward electric vehicles. When you see billions of dollars moving in a specific direction, that's not speculation, that's a signal. Money doesn't lie. People with billions of dollars to invest do extensive research before committing capital. So when you see massive capital flows in a particular direction, you can be reasonably certain that's where the future is headed. Man, this is such a simple but profound insight. We all listen to what people say, what politicians promise, what CEOs announce, what influencers predict. But Prof Jiang is saying ignore the noise and watch where the money actually goes, because that's where people's real beliefs and real bets are. I'm thinking about how I could apply this to my own life. Instead of asking what's the next big thing, I could ask, where are smart investors putting their money? Instead of listening to hype, I could follow capital flows. That's actionable intelligence. The narrator is now showing another example, Prof Jiang's 2017 prediction about the collapse of traditional retail. Again, he didn't just look at consumer surveys or retail trends. He looked at where retail real estate investors were pulling their money out of, where Amazon and other e-commerce companies were investing, where mall owners were defaulting on loans. By 2018, I was predicting massive retail closures, not because I could see the future, but because I could see the present. The money was already leaving. The smart investors had already moved on. The collapse hadn't happened yet in terms of headlines, but it had already happened in terms of capital allocation. I was just reading the financial tea leaves. This is brilliant. He's not actually predicting the future. He's observing the present more carefully than most people, and recognizing that the future is already embedded in current financial flows. The future isn't coming, it's already here, it's just not evenly distributed yet, as William Gibson said. Reason number 2. He thinks in systems, not events. Now the video is moving to Prof Jiang's second principle, and the narrator is explaining that most people think about the future in terms of discrete events. Will this specific thing happen? But Prof Jiang thinks in terms of systems and cascading effects. They're showing a clip of Prof Jiang explaining this himself. When I make a prediction, I'm not predicting a single event. I'm predicting the interaction of multiple systems. For example, when I predicted the gig economy explosion, I wasn't just saying more people will become Uber drivers. I was observing several converging trends: companies wanting to cut costs, technology enabling remote coordination, workers facing wage stagnation in traditional employment, and regulatory frameworks failing to keep pace. When you see multiple systems pushing in the same direction, you can predict with high confidence that something significant will happen at the intersection. This is systems thinking, and it's a completely different way of understanding the world. Most of us see individual events as isolated. The pandemic happened, and then remote work increased. But Prof Jiang would say no, the conditions for remote work explosion were already in place. The technology existed. The cost benefits for companies were clear. Workers were already chafing against commutes. The pandemic was just the catalyst that accelerated an existing trend. The narrator is giving another example, Prof Jiang's prediction about the decline of department stores. He didn't predict it because he thought people would suddenly stop shopping. He predicted it because he saw multiple systems converging. E-commerce making it more convenient to shop from home. Younger generations having different shopping habits. Department stores being over-leveraged with debt. Malls being overbuilt relative to actual demand. And changing real estate economics making large footprints unsustainable. When you see 5 or 6 trends all pushing in the same direction, the outcome becomes almost inevitable. It's not about predicting if it will happen, it's about predicting when and how severely. I'm realizing that this is a completely different way of thinking about causation. We're taught to think linearly, A causes B causes C. But Prof Jiang is thinking systemically. A, B, C, D, and E are all interacting and influencing each other. And the outcome emerges from the system, not from any single cause. This is harder to do, but it's clearly more accurate. And it explains why his predictions work. He's not guessing about isolated events, he's reading system dynamics. Reason number 3, he distinguishes between hype and fundamentals. Now the video is transitioning to Prof Jiang's third principle, and this one is about separating signal from noise in a world full of hype. The narrator is explaining that every year, there are dozens of next big things that get massive media coverage, huge investments, and breathless predictions about how they'll change everything. But most of them fizzle out. The Segway was going to revolutionize transportation. Google Glass was going to change computing. 3D printing was going to bring manufacturing into every home. Cryptocurrency was going to replace fiat currency. Some of these technologies found niches, but none of them transformed society the way the hype suggested. And Prof Jiang called this correctly each time. He was skeptical of the hype while others were swept up in it. They're showing a clip of Prof Jiang from 2017 talking about cryptocurrency. I see a lot of hype around cryptocurrency right now. People are making wild predictions about Bitcoin hitting $500,000 or replacing national currencies. I'm skeptical of those extreme predictions. Why? Because I ask myself, what fundamental problem does this solve for the average person that existing solutions don't solve? For most people in developed economies, digital payments already work fine. Credit cards work, bank transfers work, Venmo works. Yes, cryptocurrency offers theoretical benefits around decentralization and privacy, but most people don't value those benefits enough to deal with the complexity and volatility. And he was right. Cryptocurrency became a speculative asset and a niche technology, but it didn't replace traditional currency or transform everyday transactions for regular people. The hype was massive, but the fundamental value proposition for mainstream users wasn't there. The narrator is explaining Prof Jiang's framework for distinguishing hype from fundamentals. Question 1. Does this solve a real problem for a large number of people? Not a theoretical problem, not a problem for early adopters or tech enthusiasts, a real, painful problem that lots of regular people experience. Question 2. Is the solution significantly better than existing alternatives? Not just incrementally better, significantly better, because switching costs are real, and people need a compelling reason to change behavior. Question 3. Is the technology ready for mainstream adoption? Not just technically possible, but reliable, affordable, easy to use, and accessible to non-experts. Question 4. Are the economics sustainable? Can this actually be a profitable business, or does it only work if you ignore the economics and assume infinite funding? Question 5. What are the real barriers to adoption? Not the barriers that enthusiasts think can be easily overcome, but the actual stubborn barriers: regulatory, cultural, infrastructural, economic. If a technology or trend can pass all 5 of these tests, Prof Jiang takes it seriously. If it fails even 1 or 2, he's skeptical no matter how much hype there is. This framework is gold, because it gives us a systematic way to evaluate the constant flood of next big thing claims we encounter. Instead of getting swept up in excitement or reacting based on gut feeling, we can ask these 5 questions and get a more accurate read. I'm thinking about current hype cycles and applying this framework. The metaverse. Does it solve a real problem for lots of people? Honestly, not really. Virtual meetings exist, video games exist, social media exists. The metaverse is a solution looking for a problem. That's why Prof Jiang has been skeptical of metaverse hype, and why Meta's investments haven't produced the transformation that was predicted. But AI language models? They do solve real problems. Writing assistants, customer service, coding help, research assistants. The solution is significantly better than alternatives for many use cases. The technology is increasingly ready for mainstream use. The economics do work, so Prof Jiang has been bullish on AI, and that prediction has proven accurate. Reason number 4. He accounts for human nature. The video is now moving to Prof Jiang's 4th principle, and this one is about understanding that technology doesn't operate in a vacuum. It interacts with human psychology, human behavior, human nature. The narrator is explaining that many futurists make predictions based purely on technological capability. We can do this, therefore we will do this. But Prof Jiang adds an additional layer. We can do this, but will people actually adopt it given human nature? They're showing an example of a failed prediction from another futurist, who said that by 2020 most people would be using VR headsets daily for work and social interaction. The technology was possible, the capability existed, but it didn't account for the fact that most people don't want to wear a headset for hours at a time. It's uncomfortable, it's isolating, it's not how humans naturally want to interact. Prof Jiang predicted that VR would remain niche for gaming and specific professional applications, precisely because he understood human nature. People prefer face-to-face interaction when possible. People don't like being cut off from their physical environment. People value convenience over immersion for most daily tasks. Reason number 10. He combines multiple disciplines. The video is now explaining Prof Jiang's 10th and final principle. And this might be the most important one: his interdisciplinary approach. The narrator explains that Prof Jiang isn't just an economist, or just a technologist, or just a sociologist. He combines insights from economics, technology, sociology, psychology, history, political science, and even ecology. Most experts stay within their lane. Economists make economic predictions, tech experts make technology predictions. But Prof Jiang recognizes that the future doesn't respect disciplinary boundaries. Economic changes affect technology adoption. Technology changes affect social dynamics. Social dynamics affect political outcomes. Political outcomes affect economic policy. Everything is interconnected. They're showing examples of how this interdisciplinary approach has enabled accurate predictions. When predicting the rise of populism in Western democracies, Prof Jiang combined economic analysis of wage stagnation and inequality, sociological analysis of community breakdown and identity crisis, psychological analysis of status threat and resentment, political science analysis of institutional legitimacy erosion, historical analysis of similar conditions in the past. No single discipline would have given the complete picture. But by combining insights from all of them, Prof Jiang was able to accurately predict the rise of populist movements several years before they became dominant. The narrator is quoting Prof Jiang. The future is not going to be purely technological, or purely economic, or purely social. It will be all of these things interacting. If you only understand technology, you'll miss how humans actually adopt it. If you only understand economics, you'll miss how cultural values shape economic choices. If you only understand politics, you'll miss how technological and economic forces constrain political options. You need the full picture. This is making me realize how limited my own thinking has been. I tend to think about the future primarily through the lens of technology, because that's what I'm most interested in and knowledgeable about. But I'm missing all the other dimensions: the economic, the social, the psychological, the political. To predict accurately, I need to become more intellectually omnivorous. I need to read outside my comfort zone. I need to understand how different systems interact. The video is wrapping up now with a summary of all 10 principles. Prof Jiang's 10 principles for accurate prediction. 1. Think in systems, understand interacting trends, not isolated events. 2. Distinguish hype from fundamentals, apply rigorous tests to exciting claims. 3. Account for human nature, technology operates through human adoption. 4. Maintain emotional neutrality, don't let preferences cloud analysis. 5. Update based on new data, stay flexible and intellectually humble. 6. Think probabilistically, acknowledge uncertainty explicitly. 7. Study failures, learn systematically from errors. 8. Consider multi-order effects, think several steps ahead. 9. Combine disciplines, integrate insights from multiple fields. 10. These aren't magic, these are learnable skills. Prof Jiang isn't psychic, he's just extraordinarily disciplined about applying these principles consistently. And that's why his predictions come true, not because he can see the future, but because he can read the present more carefully than most people. Wow. This video has been incredibly educational. It's not just about Prof Jiang's specific predictions, it's about teaching us a methodology for thinking about the future. Let me think about how I can apply these principles in my own life. Following the money. Instead of just reading about trends, I could look at where venture capital is flowing, where major companies are investing R&D, where governments are spending infrastructure money. That will tell me more about what's actually coming than any amount of speculation. Systems thinking. When I see a change happening, I need to ask, what other systems does this interact with? What are the connections? What are the feedback loops? How will this ripple outward? Testing hype. Before I get excited about the next big thing, I should apply Prof Jiang's 5 questions. Does it solve a real problem? Is it significantly better? Is it ready for mainstream use? Are the economics sustainable? What are the real barriers? Accounting for human nature. When evaluating whether something will be adopted, I need to ask whether it aligns with or fights against fundamental human desires and behaviors. Emotional neutrality. I need to separate what I want to happen from what's likely to happen. This is hard because we all have preferences, but it's essential for clear thinking. Updating beliefs. When new evidence emerges, I need to be willing to change my mind, rather than defending old positions. Intellectual flexibility is a strength, not a weakness. Probabilistic thinking. Instead of making definitive claims, I should think in terms of likelihoods. There's a 60% chance, forces me to be more honest and more accurate. Learning from failures. When I'm wrong about something, I should do a deep analysis of why I was wrong, rather than just moving on. Each error is a learning opportunity. Multi-order thinking. When considering consequences, I need to ask "and then what?" repeatedly, thinking through the cascade of effects. Interdisciplinary learning. I need to read more broadly, learn from different fields, and understand how different systems interact. This is a comprehensive framework for thinking about the future. It's not easy. It requires discipline, intellectual humility, broad knowledge, and systematic thinking, but it's clearly effective. And here's what really strikes me. These principles aren't just for making predictions about global trends. They're useful for personal decision-making too. Should I take this job? Follow the money. Where is the industry investing? Where are resources flowing? Think systemically. How does this job connect to broader trends in the economy and my field? Account for human nature. Will I actually enjoy this day-to-day, or am I just attracted to the idea of it? Should I move to a new city? Consider second-order effects. How will this affect my relationships, my career growth, my finances? Update based on data. What do people who've actually made similar moves report? Think probabilistically. There's maybe a 40% chance this works out great, 40% it's neutral, 20% I regret it. These principles scale from global predictions to personal decisions. That's what makes them so powerful. All right, now I want to hear from you. Let's discuss this in the comments. Question 1. Which of Prof Jiang's 10 principles do you find most valuable? Which one do you want to start applying? Question 2. Think about a prediction you made that turned out to be wrong. Which of these principles, if you'd applied it, would have helped you be more accurate? Question 3. Are there any principles you'd add to this list? What does Prof Jiang miss? Question 4. How can we apply these principles not just to predicting global trends, but to our personal decision-making? Question 5. Do you think the future is predictable if you use the right methods? Or is there always an irreducible element of uncertainty? Let's have a deep conversation about this. These aren't just abstract ideas. These are practical tools we can use. And here's my challenge for everyone watching. This week, pick one of Prof Jiang's principles and consciously apply it to a decision you need to make. Maybe you're trying to decide whether to learn a new skill. Apply follow the money. Where are jobs growing? Where are companies investing in training? Maybe you're evaluating a new technology. Apply the hype test. Does it solve a real problem? Is it significantly better? What are the real barriers? Maybe you're making a big life decision. Instead of, should I do this, yes or no? Think, what's my confidence level that this will work out? Pick one principle. Apply it consciously. See if it improves your decision quality. Then, come back and tell us how it went. I want to thank whoever made this video for breaking down Prof Jiang's methodology so clearly. Because understanding how to think about the future is maybe even more valuable than any specific prediction. We can't all be professional futurists, but we can all become better at anticipating change, reading trends, and making decisions with an eye toward where things are headed, rather than just where they are. If this video gave you new ways of thinking about the future, hit that like button. If you want more content that helps us develop these kinds of analytical skills, subscribe to the channel. And share this with people who are trying to make big decisions, who are thinking about career moves, who are trying to understand where the world is headed. These tools are too valuable not to share. The future is coming whether we understand it or not. We might as well develop the skills to see it more clearly. Prof Jiang's predictions come true because he's mastered the art of reading the present. And that's a skill we can all develop if we're willing to put in the work. The 10 principles he uses aren't magic. They're discipline, they're rigor, they're intellectual honesty, they're systems thinking, they're continuous learning. And they're all things we can practice and improve at. So let's do that. Let's become better at reading the present so we can better anticipate the future. Let's develop the skills that will help us navigate whatever changes are coming. Because change is coming. That's the one prediction we can make with 100% confidence. The world in 5 to 10 years will be significantly different from the world today. The question is whether we'll be caught off guard by those changes, or whether we'll have seen them coming. Prof Jiang sees them coming, and by studying his methodology, we can start to see them coming too. Alright everyone, that's it for today. I'm going to spend some time really internalizing these 10 principles. I'm going to start applying them to my own thinking and decision-making. And I encourage you to do the same. Thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging with this material. Thank you for caring about thinking clearly about the future. Until next time, stay analytical, stay curious, stay adaptable. Peace, clarity, and foresight.